Welcome to the PLZ Soccer Studios. I'm Peter Martin. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by one of the directors of the Celtic Supporters Limited, Brian McLaughlin. Brian, welcome to the studios. You've put out quite a hefty brochure for everybody to read. I'm dying to write on the back of a stamp how many people are actually going to get through your 65-page document and if they ever go out to a nightclub in their life. But nevertheless, I think the sentiment behind it is for a number of Celtic supporters to try and engage, communicate, build bridges with this current Celtic board to try and achieve what?
Great question, mate. Look, I think you're right. 65 pages of what is predominantly academic writing is not for everybody's taste. And I guess the point of the paper was to prove that the CSL was more than just a sort of talking shop, that it actually had went away and done its homework and done its research, looked at the club versus other clubs of similar scale, and looked at the club in terms of the broader football landscape, and sort of started to benchmark it. And the real purpose of it was to sort of then hold to account the people who make the decisions and say, we believe as a fan voice and as a growing fan voice, this is where we'll challenge you. And this is where we'll come forward with, a fairly easy, simple 12 sort of a step framework that we think is a scorecard that every PLC board and football club should be held against. And ultimately, that's what we'll judge the board on.
Yeah, have you handed it
in? They've got sight of it. Yes, they've got sight of it. I'm sure they'll be more than happy with the homework we've gave them to do. But I mean, again, we have been pragmatic in the paper. The paper is in no way a hatchet job of the board of the PLC. The paper takes you succinctly through what's good about the club, what's not so good, and what could be better. It's not, by any stretch of the imagination, it's not a complete assassination. But we think that the club, that it believes that it is this sort of a world-class entity. I mean, it has worldwide global fan base, but it doesn't act like that internally, and that's what we want to try and change.
Yeah, how receptive do you think they're going to be to that, and what time frame do you think before they eventually get back to you?
Well, look, there's an AGM in November, and
They don't always go according to plan, Brian.
Yeah. Actually, one of our framework is how you better organise an AGM and how you make sure. Look, that was a farce, and it was a farce that suited them more than probably suited the fans. But we fundamentally believe that our focus is on that AGM as a sort of a fan voice and as a shareholder block. That's what we are focusing on. We want to put forward proposals at that AGM that we can enable and enact change. But we're also very aware of how the PLC board works, and we know that I'm sure they won't be too forthcoming and too receptive. But we believe there's a sort of a 37,000 shareholders. That's quite a majority. It might be a silent majority, but we are doing the education of the shareholders. Accumulating the proxy votes, acquiring shares where we can through the membership, and we hopefully be a meaningful voice.
I know you want a greater amount of transparency, and you're trying to be fair in your assessment of the way the club is run and how you'd like to see some doors opened up. But that transparency, if you look back over since 2000, there's been a lot of success, and that board for me is a well-oiled machine. It's certainly, from a financial point of view, one of the best run boards in the country, and in the UK, and some would argue Europe.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what fundamentally would you like to see changed that you think has gone wrong?
Well, I mean, I think as a fan, you can look to the sort of a connection between the club, but you could also argue that there's never really been a great connection between boardroom and fan, and then there isn't in a lot of clubs, so that's no different to Celtic. But I think what's very much has become apparent for this season in particular is that it's the sort of a batten down the hatches, we're right, everybody else is wrong, put the ear defenders on, don't listen to the external noise. And I don't think this time they can come back with just pulling the rabbit out of a hat. They did it before with, I guess you could say Martin O'Neill when he came in the first time in 2000 and galvanised the support. And then when you brought Brendan back, sort of rabbit out of the hat after the semi-final defeat to Rangers, was a rabbit out of a hat, and back the man, give him some money, and they think that everybody will just go away. I think it's different this time. I think this time the camel's back's broke. The fans want change in their masses, and that silent majority is no longer that silent. The problem that I think a lot of fans face is it's how do you get there? is protest the way to get there? Well, it's been proven in the past that it's a part of the journey, but it's never the sort of an end point. And for us at the CSL, the way we believe this battle is fought and won, ultimately over a longer period of time, is in the boardroom with corporate governance, because that's the language that they talk, and that's the only way you can win this, is by talking their language.
I know you've got a 12-point plan, and it sounds a bit top of the pops here. Talk us from 12 to 1. But what are the key elements that you think fans will embrace and say, well, listen, we might want to get under the umbrella of the Celtic Supporters Limited and help you in your cause. So what do you think are the key issues that you want addressed by this board?
Yeah, I mean, none of them come as a surprise to probably the vast majority of Celtic fans. They all talk about them on their buses and the pubs before games and after games and stuff. But fundamentally, the sort of a short-term ones that we think are absolutely definite and almost at no cost to the board, there's nothing needing done to do these, is that publishing of a strategic plan. What is that strategic plan? And whether that's a 3-year, a 5-year, a 7-year, a 10-year, we don't really care. Just show us where you think this club's going.
What about that? Well, I mean, that plan itself is evident. I've seen it since 2000, which is quite simply, we're going to bring in players. They all fit within a certain age group. We're going to sell them on, and that, if we don't make Champions League, will fill the shortfall.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that's what that plan is.
No, I know,
You're not happy with that plan.
No, but I think when you look at that plan, you actually have to look at where it's failed, and it fails more than it works. So for us, that is it's quite a sugary peg to build your strategy on. That if we don't make the Champions League, we just sell one of our good players. Well, let's look at the past couple of transfer windows. There's not been many good players that have came in that you could probably sell on.
Yeah, but I'd counter that by saying to you, well, wait a minute, Brian, they've got £77 million in the bank. There's going to be a hell of a lot more coming in after the last year.
Absolutely. And our point would be is that you can have £77 million in the bank, but if you've not got a plan as to what you're going to do with that money, then that's not a good place to be. That money should be getting spent on the club in some way, shape or form. And that's what the paradox lays out. It's not just about on the pitch. It's definitely not. We need to think about the entirety of the club. I sit in the South Stand. I go into the South Stand every home game. I can go into the toilets. There's no hot water in the middle of the winter. I'm lucky if I get a hot bovril. You get a pie of differing temperature every day. The surroundings of that South Stand are pretty antiquated. And then you think about the rest of the stadium that's really not had any development since the sort of 2000s. So if you've got capital, how do you not make sure as a company, as a board, that you sit down and think about how do we apply this capital in the club in a variety of different ways, not just on the pitch, but in the footprint of the stadium where the fan experience can be better? Because ultimately it's an entertainment. You want fans at the stadium longer spending money. That's how you make revenue. We're never going to compete with the Premiership clubs. We're never going to get to 100 million. Celtic got, 3 million this year in TV revenue? Burnley probably got 100 million in TV revenue. So there's no comparison in that, and we're never going to breach that gap. But what you can do is you can create an environment that fans are willing to come and spend more money. Dare I say it, I'm not saying the sort of a foreign fans come over and spend 100 quid in the shop every time, but give the fans something within that stadium confines that they know they can come, spend the day, want to be there longer, want to go and have a drink and a pie or some food. Where's the hotel? Where's the museum? Where did all these plans supposedly go? They just disappear off a cliff.
What's different from you and the other factions within the Celtic support then? Because quite a lot of them want change at boardroom level. Do you want that?
I think change is needed, absolutely. It's paramount that we have a stale board that doesn't pose enough challenge. For me, any sort of a board should have a leader that is surrounded by people who will constantly bring forward suggestions to improve the board, but also challenge the leader's decision-making process. And we don't think that happens.
Do you want a change of owner?
No, I mean,
or majority shareholder, dare I say?
I think what we're asking for is, if you read the sort of a plan in the paradox, is about becoming a better ran company. That's all we are saying now. We've got no doubt that when the majority shareholder put his money into the club, has the club been successful on the pitch in Scotland? Yes. Have we had limited success in the transfer sort of a model? Yes. But when you look outside of that, what has the academy really produced the club in terms of ongoing players on the pitch or sell-on value? Very, very little. We think about so there's other things that the board could be doing to be better than what they currently are, and whether that's Dermot Desmond or not, or whether it's somebody else, that's a different question. But can the current board be better than what they currently are? Yep.
Yeah, it's difficult to say this, but the last time I had a season ticket at Celtic was 1987-88, before I get into journalism and then became a cynic. But at that time, the board did need change, because after they won the double in the centenary year, they went back again to that biscuit tin mentality and signed very few players, and then get involved in all sorts of debacles along the way before eventually the Rebels had won.
The Rebels have won.
But now I look at this board from 2000 onwards, and I haven't seen, and I'll probably say Dermot from 2000 to 2003 ambition.
Yep.
If I was looking, and I talked to many Celtic fans and friends of mine, the ultimate thing that I see from 2003 onwards, with consultation with many a Celtic manager and many a Celtic player, is that the ambition in Europe is where the biggest pain is coming from. Now, I don't know a Celtic fan, Brian, who wants them to spend millions upon millions on players, but they certainly want close to a strategy that Brendan Rodgers called for in the second time around, whether you're a fan of Brendan or not, which was, they want to go and see Celtic, they want to pay their money, but they want to see Celtic at least try and have a better strategy in recruitment that gives them a chance not to hear the Champions League theme and then get spanked. Is that fair?
I mean, it's absolutely fair, because that's what the Celtic fans experience pretty much year on year. I think the model that Celtic approached was, the transfer model was to go out and identify, players from leagues of a similar size to Scottish football, and bring their best over to our league, profile them in the Champions League, get them winning trophies, and then sell them on. And to an extent that works, but guess what? People start to copy you what you're doing in other clubs. There's so much global exposure to football players nowadays, and so much, the scouting network is so big that no player goes under the radar. Everybody knows everything. We see that in Jamestown analytics now. So I think that model is replicated so much that where Celtic now have to shop becomes a very different marketplace. And some say we got lucky with Japan because of Angie's knowledge. Some say this club made a good strategic decision. The truth's probably somewhere in between. They had to spend the money with the right players and then bring them in and do well.
See, I look at the Celtic strategy and I see from 2003 onwards, when Martin was told, rein it in.
Yeah, rein it in, absolutely.
I see their strategy as always analysing what their main competitor was doing.
Aye.
And then when Rangers were going downwards, they just said, it's easy for Celtic just to do enough.
Way off the accelerator. Take your foot off the gas a wee bit.
Yeah.
And look, again, that comes back to that sort of where do you spend capital? There's at times when Celtic should have put the foot down and spent capital in different places. So whether that's transfers, whether it's stadium footprint or whatever, absolutely. And then I understand that at times in a business that you have to say, right, let's weigh back a wee bit. We can't just keep spending money, because there could be dark times around the corner, and we have to strategically plan. But again, going back to that point, if there is no strategic plan, if there is no plan that says we aim to get here, and my belief is that they don't want to put a plan out there, because then they can be held accountable to a plan.
Yeah.
But guess what? Sometimes you've got to take some hits in the chin. Now they're just taking loads of hits in the chin because there's no plan, and they've got nothing to defend. Whereas coming out and saying, "Oh, well, we've won the league again, we've won this cup again," that's great. I mean, the fans will be happy, but this time it's different. I don't think the fans are content anymore.
Well, tell me how it's different then, because you put out a 12-point plan, and you've mentioned things like, for example, your understanding of the fact they can't compete against some of the stronger European outfits. You've mentioned the need to highlight a strategy for the academy. You've mentioned the stadium and trying to make that experience more favourable.
Yeah.
You've also mentioned the fact that you think there's ways that they can maximise the earning potential even more than it does at the moment. Although I have to say they're a well-oiled machine when it comes to that.
They do okay.
But I wonder, where are you getting that sense that there's change? Because sooner or later, let's just say they invite you in and you sit down with them and they say, okay, well, listen, we'll give you a strategy. What happens if you don't like the strategy, but that strategy is continuing from the same as gone before? How are you going to implement change?
It's a great point. Look, I think our key focus is, and how do we get there in the first instance is really important. So our plan is to grow the membership base as big and as broad as we possibly can. We talk in the paper about Benfica with 300,000 fan members paying €10 a month. Gives them a huge focus and a huge bit of capital. They can go and buy a stake in the club. Now, As Celtic of a similar size to Benfica, absolutely. And there's other things we can look at Benfica in terms of their academy system, where they've generated €700 million plus in the past 5 years against Celtic's €5 million probably. So we think we grow that fan base, membership base of the CSL as big as we possibly can. When we're doing that, we buy the shares that we get through the membership subscriptions. The next phase of that is proxies. So we engage with the current existing shareholders of Celtic PLC, highlight to them what we want to be doing with our voting block, and get them on board with us. And we make that voting block a bigger, more powerful voice. And then when you start to go into the AGM system and you're putting forward resolutions or voting against resolutions, it's quite meaningful. It becomes quite a meaningful block because a lot of voters don't vote. A lot of shareholders don't vote, sorry. So we want to take that whole block and start to make a dent in that. And what you can, every resolution passes at sort of a 98% at the moment.
Yeah.
Let's get that down to 70, and start making a meaningful impact and start forcing the government's hand to make change.
And do you think they will be receptive to that if you get to that figure in your mind?
I think you can. I think the board have done a good job at keeping the fan base uneducated on the workings of a PLC. There's some, you think about the untraced dividends, shareholders been disconnected from shares. The club hasn't really done a great deal to do that. If you're a fan at the moment and you've inherited shares from your dad, the club does nothing to help you get those shares into your name, or retrace some of the dividends that your dad or mum might have been owed through over the past 20 odd years. That shows to me that a club likes that sort of a fragmented shareholder where there's 37,000, but they don't all work together in concert together. And our job as CLSL is to bring that voice together.
And are you trying to get some of the other, by the way, there are other supporters groups.
Aye.
Some of them who, I think a lot of Celtic fans are saying, listen, you can voice your discontent, but you need to start behaving like Celtic fans.
Absolutely.
So, but how are you going to try and are you trying to get other groups within your umbrella?
Yeah, we've said from the very start that the way we are doing this is very much a governance-led approach. We want to, I mentioned, we want to win this, we want to have this battle, for want of a better word, in the boardroom where we can actually, talk their language and make change, because we don't think that we're going to do that by, not spending money on pies in the ground. We just don't think that's going to have the meaningful impact that the fans wanted to have. There's a variety of different ways of, I suppose, approaching this, and they all matter. So there's the sort of the collective and the trust, a bit more partisan, a bit more protest. They try to make as much noise as possible that way. But ultimately, boards don't sack themselves. Boards are changed through governance, through corporate change within the company. And we believe that the CSL is very much the only organisation that's designed from beginning with the capabilities and the knowledge within to do that.
So you've got a Celtic board who undoubtedly at some point, whether it be on radio, television, print, who've probably listened to yourself, listened to Duncan Smiley. What is the message, if they're watching it right now, what is the message that you would hand out to them right now?
A brilliant question, and I hope they're already aware of that. But fundamentally, it is, we have came forward with a proposition and a paper and a framework that we think sets out a fairly clear path as to how you can improve the running of our football club, and take what is the soul of the club, and I guess put the wind behind that with the capital that we've got, and start applying that capital in the places that we can start generating more money and putting a better product on the pitch, because ultimately that's what we all want. I've got no doubt all the Celtic men and women in that boardroom want the club to be better on the pitch. They just don't act like that. They don't have a plan that shows that. So our ask for them is to read the paper, engage with us. We'll keep making the framework available. We'll keep putting it out there to see where we think we score you on that framework, and we'll keep doing our work towards the AGM and beyond that, and growing our voice.
And how aware of you are you of the fact that the board could quite simply say, well, listen, we're going to have a wee listen to you, we'll sit down, we'll chat with you, but they are one of the best boards ever at kicking it down the park for quite a long while, giving you a token of what they think is going to keep you happy, and they're going to carry on their merry way because they're a powerful board. This is not This is not an old board from 1993, 94, which was helpless and financially ruined.
Well, it's not a distressed club either,
Yes.
by any stretch of the imagination. And again, we're also very cognizant of that. And I think we're eyes wide open to how the board may treat this. We hope they surprise us. That's the hope. Our realistic view is that we have to work really hard and keep the exposure on them, keep the spotlight on them, and we will continue to do that. You know, the Paradox paper, there's nothing been wrote like that in Celtic fan history. You know, 65 pages of academic research on how this board runs the club and how this board could run it better if they made some changes, and benchmarking it against peers that we all talk about, the Club Bruges, all the Copenhagen, these clubs that are doing so much more than us.
Bodo Glimt.
Bodo Glimt, yeah.
Buck the trend for them.
Absolutely, aye. But all these, when you think about, we think about Celtic and we talk about, this global behemoth, we're on the top 50 football brands, there's so much to love about Celtic Football Club from a global perspective, and we just look at it and think, what are you actually doing as the incumbent, owners of this football club? What are you actually doing with that power at the moment, other than just maintenance?
Okay, let me ask you this then, and we're coming to the end of our joyous discussion. Let me ask you then, we're in June, so how quickly do you want to get round the table with them?
Well, I've got my phone on me. I've not heard it ringing since we've been talking, but yeah, the reality is we hope that the club do want to sit down, that there's an open letter going to them to sit down and have a conversation about this paper, and we put forward our suggestions and some of the things that we're working on. It's up to them how they take that forward and how they engage with us. Our next port of call is the AGM, and we're doing some work around what we'll be putting forward at that as a resolution. In the meantime, our big goal is to get the membership up as high as we possibly can. 9 million fans globally. When we look at some of the other organisations that are, we get thrown it as the sort of a Judean front of people on the people's front of Judea, yes, and that kind of stuff.
One of my favourite movies.
Yeah, it's a brilliant movie, Life of Brian. And look, it's a fair criticism. What we fundamentally believe is that we speak for the global fan base who want to do this and do this in the right way, and understand that the battle can only be won in that corporate boardroom, and it won't be won by them buying us off as such, or trying to just bring us inside the tent and, give us the, tuna sandwiches and custard creams, because that's not going to work.
So the double hasn't silenced you?
The double's definitely. I actually think this, I don't think, there'll be an element of the fan base, there always is, that success on the football pitch, that's it, that's all they care about. I've sat in the main stand for 20 plus years now, sat in the North Stand before that, and went to the Jungle before that. I don't think I can think back to when the Rebels won, but I don't think the average fan knew. That sort of a silent majority. There's an old guy at 72 sits next to me, and I talk to him more about the running of the club than I ever have done in 20 odd years. The average fan is new. This needs to fix. This needs to be better, because there's no point in having 80 million in the bank if you're not going to do anything with it. There's no point in just a maintenance role. There's no point in the majority shareholder, running the club like an investment trinket that he just sees it as I spent money a long time ago. I don't want to ever spend a penny on it again. That's fine, but spend the money that we're making, and then give us an opportunity to actually help raise the club's profile more. And there's plenty of ways of doing that. It just seems like there's no plan to do that.
Well, listen, Brian, I'm not going to hold my breath. I really do hope...
I had hair when I started this.
Yeah, absolutely. I really do hope you succeed in it, because there are decent people in there who are working away hard for Celtic.
There always is.
Yeah.
There always is. And I think when you look around, some of the people that have left Celtic, who were in that sort of a world, have now left and went on to really good things, because they've went into clubs who have gave them the opportunity to excel. And I'm talking about not footballing wise, I'm talking about boardroom wise. Adrian Philby went on to Aston Villa and doing great things down there, because the environment that people like that go into allow them to excel. Whereas the environment within Celtic is, we don't want excellence. We talk about excellence, but actually it's maintenance, and everybody is here just to maintain a certain person's investment and make sure that we don't ever need to go to anybody and ask for a bailout. And that can't continue anymore. We need good people at every level operating within our club. You don't always need the best, you don't always need to be Celtic men, but they need to be good at what they do. They need to be the top operators. And there is some good operators in there currently, but we just need them to sort of man up a wee bit, and do what they're meant to.
And show a modicum of humility.
And show a modicum of humility, aye, absolutely. And look, we obviously don't stand for any of the, we're not a protest movement, and some of the nonsense that's went on is it's definitely beyond reproach. We don't agree with any of that at all. All these people are human beings. They've all got families. They've all got a life outside of the club, and I'm sure they all love Celtic as much as what we do. All we are doing is saying, look, we think there's better ways of running this club, and if you were smart enough, you would listen to what other people are saying externally and take on the advice, because that's what good people do in business. Take on advice from smarter people round about them. And I'm not saying that's me. I'm saying listen to as many voices as you can, bring all those voices together, and then put forward a plan that you think is credible, that can actually take this club to the levels that we expect it to be, start delivering an academy that is commensurate with what Celtic's done in the past. When we look back through, the 60s, 70s, 80s, when we had a conveyor belt of young talent coming through. We've spent more money in our academy than ever, and it's producing less than it probably ever has. That needs to change. And then the product on the pitch has to be better, because the transfer policy has to be better, and capital has to be applied in the right places at the right times, as opposed to just this sort of a scattergun, let's throw some money around and hope one pays off out of the 12. It's not working anymore.
Okay, I'm going to finish with this one last question, which again, slightly cynical, but what happens if they just say to you, no, we're on the club, shut the door on you, like it or lump it? What are you going to do?
I think that galvanises the fan base more. I think what that does is actually prove to the entirety of the fan base as to what we all think. So those who are a wee bit on the fence at times and think, no, they're doing a good job, leave them at it. I think when you put forward, as we have done with the Paradox paper, a fairly comprehensive report, and we start to see this is how we're going to hold you to account. And those metrics, that 12-point framework is by no means onerous. If the club just close the door on us and shut their ears, then I think what that says to the sort of a moderate fan is actually change is definitely needed, and then they step up even more and they back us even more. And we can see that. We know through the people who have already offered us their proxy votes for the upcoming AGM that there's a lot there. The membership's growing great. We're already speaking to investors about how do we get bigger chunks of the shareholding, and we'll continue to do that. So, ignore us at your peril, but we're not going away.
Brian, couldn't put it better myself. Absolutely delighted that you came into the studio. Thanks to Brian McLaughlin, and delighted that he came into the PLZ Soccer Studios. Thank you to you for watching, and thank you to you for listening.